So today what we're here to talk about is to discuss the issue of why vaccination is important and how we can work together to improve the uptake of vaccination, and how we can challenge the myths that seem to have arisen around vaccination, sort of some of which are just incredible. So we'll look at the background to the vaccination, the vaccinations, their importance, how they work, the logistics of how they get sort of delivered around the country, and then we'll talk about, allow you to talk to address sort of your concerns, and then sort of next steps going forward. So the background to some of the information that we've got comes from something called the UK Household Longitudinal Study, and the information that came at the beginning of this year shows that there is vaccine hesitancy in the population, but that it's been particularly high in the black community, as you'll see from the figures, in the Pakistani Bangladeshi community, in those who describe their ethnicity as mixed, and in people who are white but don't originally come from the UK. So that's probably in Oldham would be the Eastern European communities in particular. There was a survey done through the Oldham Council of Mosques, again at the beginning of the year, that revealed that the main issues were a sort of lack of trust in terms of vaccine testing and the ingredients in the vaccines, and also in the government and other decision makers. So they are sort of pretty serious concerns and valid concerns, and not dissimilar to concerns that people have had about other vaccine programmes. So it's perhaps fair to say that this isn't anything new, this behaviour, but because it's to do with COVID, it just seems to have a sort of bigger and much more devastating impact. Okay, so talking about vaccines and talking about the testing and the importance of having vaccines. If we talk about vaccines in general, in order to get a licence to be used in the UK, vaccines have got to meet really strict standards. They've got to be seen to be safe. They've got to be seen to be of good quality in the way that they're manufactured, and they've also got to be seen to be effective, because there's no point giving a vaccine unless it's going to be effective in the population that you're trying to protect. So we know the data at the moment shows that over 20 million people have already received a COVID-19 vaccine. Most of these are first doses, but some people have already got their second doses, and I'm due to get my second dose this weekend. And out of all those 20 million people, the number of serious side effects have been very rare. And I mean very rare, out of 20 million. We tell people when we're giving them the vaccination that they may experience some side effects. You might have a sore arm for a few days afterwards, and some people might experience flu-type symptoms. And in some ways, it's not dissimilar to what you might expect after you've had your flu vaccination. if you're somebody who's offered that in the winter. You know, you might need to spend the next day in bed, but usually by the following day, people feel okay again. But that's nothing like getting COVID. And even if you get COVID mildly, and I would put myself in the mild group, when I had it back in June last year, you know, it's nothing like getting COVID. Getting the vaccine isn't the only thing that you've got to do. You still need to remember to do things like washing your hands, wearing a face mask, social distancing, all those sorts of things that we're doing, you know, sort of all the time. And the best way to protect yourself, you know, is by adding that in, adding the vaccine into that routine. And that's the way that we're going to protect most people in the population, and we're going to save most lives that way. And the evidence coming from the number of vaccines that we've given now that we're seeing, you know, as I was driving here today, I was listening to the news, and you know, it is really quite startling how the numbers are now beginning to fall. You know, the numbers of people who are in hospital with COVID, the numbers of people who are dying within the 28 days of getting COVID, and the numbers of people who are getting COVID and it becoming a serious illness for them. Because you can still get COVID after you've had a vaccination, but the likelihood then of it becoming serious, i.e. needing to go to hospital, into intensive care and those sorts of things, the illness that people might pick up tends to be so much milder. So, you know, the evidence to me, and I know, you know, it's easy for me to say that because I'm used to looking at, you know, statistics and medical evidence and things like that. The evidence is just overwhelmingly in favour of having the vaccine. So this is a slide with a bit of science on it. It's in quite small writing, but essentially it's demonstrating about how one of the vaccines works. This is talking about an RNA vaccine, which is the Pfizer vaccine. And essentially, the Pfizer vaccine's slightly different to the AstraZeneca. You know, they work on different pathways, but they get to the same place in the end. The Pfizer vaccine is the one that sort of hits the spike protein on the virus, because if you see the pictures of the bigger virus with the little spikes sticking off it, that's where the Pfizer vaccine attaches itself, and it causes cells in your bloodstream to make antibody, and it also activates the T cells, which are part of your white blood cell. Within your white blood cells, you've got different groups of cells, but it particularly activates the T cells, and they're the ones that neutralise essentially the virus. The AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the other one that's currently licensed for use in the UK, is a bit more like the vaccines that you might have had yourself before, and the childhood vaccines, where you inject a sort of safe but modified bit of the virus essentially. So your body's sort of meeting the virus, but then your antibodies, like with the other one, realise that it's foreign protein, foreign substance, and it's not good for you, so it goes into attack mode and it neutralises you produce antibodies which then stop it spreading within your body, so that you put up resistance to it, essentially. There are some other vaccines that are going to come on board, but the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer are currently the only two vaccinations that are being used in the UK. But across the world, all the vaccines that are being used do seem to be effective. You know, sort of, they talk about different levels of effectiveness, but they're all good enough. So, you know, people said, oh, I want this one, I want that one, I want the other. But to be honest, there's not an awful lot of difference between them, and not enough to stop, you know, to suggest that one is better than the other. Whether your sort of personal data, whether there's any implication to your personal data from having the vaccination, and whether there are any charges for vaccination. And again, Public Health England have confirmed that as far as people sort of travelling or coming in from overseas, there's no immigration checks for overseas visitors. They're only, you know, sort of tested, treated or vaccinated for COVID-19. That information isn't passed on to the Home Office or anything like that. And as far as coronavirus testing or the treatment or the vaccination for anybody who, you know, may be in the country from overseas, who might not normally be eligible for, you know, treatment in the UK, there's no charge for any of that. You know, sort of, we want people to come forward for testing. We want people to come forward for treatment. You know, sort of, it would be totally wrong to charge people for that. You know, you may have to pay for private tests to go on holiday or to travel, to go to, you know, to go to other countries. But in terms of, you know, people living their life here day to day in this country, you know, you should not be expected to pay for tests. This next set of series of slides are about some of the myths. So COVID's no more dangerous than the flu. Okay. Well, for some people, possibly not, and we know that some people have COVID without any symptoms, you know, these asymptomatic carriers, and we know that most of the children, you know, are not seriously ill with flu. But if you get proper COVID, it is not like flu, you know, sort of, it floors you, and that's when you get it, you know, relatively mildly. And the other thing is that, you know, even with flu, people do die with flu every year. You know, that's why we vaccinate every year, because we know that the flu virus changes, and so the flu vaccination changes to try and keep ahead of the game. And we encourage people to take the flu vaccination, because we know people do die with flu. Probably mainly older people, and probably people who, you know, sort of are fairly sort of poorly anyway. But COVID's different. COVID kills fit people. You know, previously fit people. It's totally you know, doesn't discriminate. It doesn't just pick off, you know. A lot of elderly people have died with COVID, but a lot of young people have died with COVID, or they've been very sick with COVID, and sort of there are people who are still months on having to rehabilitate from COVID. There was somebody on the TV last night who was who'd been a regular marathon runner, very fit man, sort of late 20s, early 30s, who had had COVID, and he is struggling. Sort of, he certainly can't run marathons. He's struggling to walk to the end of his street. So, do not underestimate COVID. It's fickle, it's wicked, it's naughty. It's your worst nightmare. It really is. COVID vaccine ingredients are haram. Well, the truth is that the Pfizer vaccine doesn't contain any animal products at all. It's I suppose, it's a manufactured vaccine. There's no animal in it. It's like a lot of the sort of modern drugs. It was invented and manufactured in a laboratory, with no animal involvement in it. So, sort of, this has been an issue particularly for the Islamic community, and the scholars have declared that yes, it is haram. It's perfectly acceptable to take it, and even as Christians could have it on Friday. There's no reason not to. There's no reason not. There's no reason not to have it. What's this next one? All right, the vaccine was approved too quickly to be safe. Well, it is true. Things did move fast because they had to move fast. But what you've got to remember is that, sort of, although it's a new virus that is particularly nasty, it is related to other viruses. It is a coronavirus, of which there are lots of other coronaviruses. And although this one has particular characteristics that makes it more infectious, more dangerous, there are still bits of it that work like other viruses. And in terms of developing a vaccine to protect people against it, there was already an awful lot of work done, a lot of scientific work done, that allowed the scientists, based on their previous knowledge of making vaccinations, they were able to use that knowledge and sort of, be confident that they were on the right track. It's like modifying the flu vaccine year on year. It is not quite exactly the same vaccination that you'll be offered this year that you got last year, because they have to tweak it, and so yes, there was a bigger tweak for this one, but it was still done in a scientific way that the people who do this sort of research were doing all the time. And in terms of the sort of rollout of the vaccine and the testing and things like that, a lot of the testing of the vaccine was going on from quite early last year, because as soon as it became evident that we were into a pandemic, the scientists went into overdrive. If I think we've been working hard out in general practice, they've been working harder, because sort of they've been working 24 hours a day, to perfect the science and things like that. So something that might take 3 you know, 3 months working 8-hour shifts, they did in a month because they were working 24-hour shifts. So, you know, sort of the speeding up of the process, yes, things were done very quickly, but they weren't done cutting corners and, you know, compromising people's safety. COVID causes irreversible side effects. COVID vaccine, sorry. Yeah, COVID causes irreversible side effects. There are a lot of people who will never get back their full health because they have had COVID. But the vaccine doesn't do that. You know, the vaccine prevents you getting COVID and does a good job at doing that. And for those who, you know, may not be fully vaccinated and still catch COVID, it stops them getting really ill. So, you know, it is a 2-dose vaccine, and we tell people after they've had their first vaccination that they've still got to be careful. They'll get partial immunity after about 2 to 3 weeks, but they do have to come back for their second dose. Okay. The vaccine may modify your DNA. I suppose this goes in with the putting a microchip in, you know, Bill Gates and all those other conspiracy theories. Well, the COVID vaccine, certainly for the Pfizer, does use mRNA technology, and that's RNA, not DNA. There is a difference. But they're not putting DNA into your cells. You know, sort of, it's not gene therapy. And they're not putting microchips in either. And with the mRNA component with the Pfizer vaccine, that gets broken down by your body. You know, sort of, it's just used to get the vaccine in, to get the vaccine, you know, to do its job, to get your body to react to the vaccination, and then the mRNA's broken down, so nothing goes into your cells. You know, just be quite clear about that. You know, they are stories that, you know, people are making up. It's science fiction. Okay. Here we are on the microchip, yes. The microchip's being used to track the population. Well, no. You know, I'm having trouble tracking down 1 or 2 people who we vaccinate. If there was a microchip, I'd be using it, but there isn't. So, you know, sort of, and it says here, independent authorities across the world from countries that compete with each other have approved the vaccine and not found any microchips. And there's far easier ways to track the population, mobile phones, bank cards, you know, than biological trackers. You know, sort of, that's James Bond territory. So, right, COVID vaccines can make you infertile and able to have children. Right, this has caused lots of issues. And there's been one that, you know, sort of has, you know, been spread widely through social media, and has caused, you know, a lot of upset and a lot of distress. You know, the reason goes back to a German epidemiologist, so that's somebody who sort of studies diseases in populations, suggested that COVID would cause the body to make this anti-syncytin-1 antibodies. But he said that there was no indication that this was the case. You know, it was a theory that, you know, I don't know where he discussed it. Could have been in the pub or wherever. But put forward, and then it, like Topsy, it grew. But there's no evidence, and you know, now when they did the vaccine trial, there were a number of women in the trials who've since become pregnant, you know, because when you're doing vaccine trials, you tend to get a younger population volunteering. And so some of these, you know, sort of younger women have gone on, you know, have got pregnant since then. There are, you know, we can vaccinate pregnant women, and you know, sort of, there are some pregnant women, the ones who have underlying health conditions, for example, for whom it's really important to be vaccinated. At the moment, you know, sort of, it's not mandatory that all pregnant women should be vaccinated, but certainly the ones with health conditions, we would strongly advise that they should consider to be vaccinated. And you know, watch this space on that, because the advice does change, and you know, the more sort of confidence that we build with time, because it's not just a case of, right, we've done the trials and they're over. The trials are still ongoing, so we're still learning from you know, more information that will come out, and more evidence to back up you know, to back things up at the moment.